Mason Hale thought he was flying to meet the love of his life until Reyna Marquez revealed he had walked straight into a predator's trap. Reyna Marquez never met Mason Hale, yet she became the only person who could save him from a scam built around her stolen identity. Mason Hale chased a dream across the world, but Darius Ventura, the man in the faded cap, was waiting to make sure he never came back. Reyna Marquez recognized Mason Hale instantly, not because they knew each other, but because she had seen his face on the criminal's target list. Mason Hale followed Liana Cruz to Manila, but the real woman in the photos, Reyna Marquez, watched a stranger try to drag him away in broad daylight. Darius Ventura tracked Mason Hale through the city, but a single unexpected moment exposed the entire scheme. Mason Hale believed he was beginning a new life in Manila until Reyna Marquez uncovered the truth that could have cost him his own. Reyna Marquez lived in fear of the criminals who stole her identity, but Mason Hale was the one who nearly died because of it. Mason Hale had always lived a quiet life, the kind that moved in predictable patterns. He worked long hours at a small tech company in Michigan, ate dinner alone at the same kitchen table every night, and ended most days by scrolling through travel sites he knew he would never visit. His life felt like a hallway with no doors, just straight, empty, and silent. That changed the evening. He stumbled onto an online forum filled with pictures of warm beaches, bright markets, and smiling faces from the Philippines. He didn't join the forum to make friends. He joined because he liked looking at places that felt far away from his monotonous world. But one night, he noticed a profile that stood out from the rest. The user was named Liana Cruz. Her posts were filled with vibrant images of Manila, always showing pieces of the city he never knew existed. A jeepney decorated with bright colors, a night market glowing under string lights, a quiet street with soft sunrise light touching the rooftops. Everything in her pictures felt alive in a way his own life did not. Her writing style was simple but warm. She often described the smell of street food, the sounds of early morning vendors, and the laughter she heard from her neighbors. Mason read her posts every day, waiting for new ones like small gifts. He felt almost embarrassed by how excited they made him. Still, he never imagined she would notice him. Then one evening she replied to one of his comments. It was short, but Mason read it repeatedly until the words felt memorized. She thanked him for admiring her city and encouraged him to visit someday. That sentence lodged itself deep in his mind. The idea grew slowly at first, but after a few weeks it consumed him. He began looking up flights out of curiosity. Then he started pricing hotels, researching neighborhoods, and watching videos of the places Liana posted about. The more he learned, the more he felt he belonged there. His ordinary life in Michigan suddenly felt like a mistake, as if he had been waiting for a cue to leave all along. The people around him noticed his sudden change. He smiled more. He checked his phone constantly. He talked about Manila like it was a place he had dreamed of since childhood. When he told his co-workers he planned to travel there, they reacted with concern. Some warned him about going too far for someone he barely knew. Others teased him gently, but Mason brushed it all off. He didn't feel reckless. He felt hopeful for the first time in years. He sold most of his belongings to fund the trip: furniture, electronics, even sentimental items he once thought he would keep forever. Each sale made the trip feel more real. Each empty space in his apartment felt like preparation for a new beginning. When the day finally came, he packed a single suitcase containing clothes, a camera, and a notebook. He told himself he was starting a new chapter in life, one that would be better than everything he had known so far. During the flight, he pictured the moment he would meet Liana. He imagined her greeting him with the same warmth she wrote with. He imagined walking beside her through the streets he had memorized from her photos. The thought filled him with calm, blocking out every doubt that tried to surface. When the plane landed in Manila, the doors opened to thick humid air and a rush of unfamiliar sounds. Mason felt overwhelmed, but in a good way. Everything he saw, the crowded terminals, the glowing signs, the chaos of luggage carts, felt like proof he had made the right decision. He believed he had arrived in a place that would change his life. What Mason didn't know was that someone had been waiting for him long before he stepped off that plane, and their intentions were nothing like the dream he carried in his heart. Manila greeted Mason with a rush of heat, noise, and movement that hit him the moment he stepped out of the airport. Cars, taxis, and motorcycles filled the roads in chaotic harmony, weaving through one another with surprising ease. He rode to his hotel in a small taxi that rattled with every bump. The driver hummed quietly the entire way, unfazed by the endless honking around them. Mason pressed his forehead to the window, taking in every detail as if he might miss something important. The hotel he chose was modest, tucked between a convenience store and a small bakery in Malate. It wasn't fancy, but it felt authentic. He checked in quickly, eager to explore the city he had admired from afar for so long. The staff gave him a polite nod as he passed through the lobby, dragging his suitcase behind him. He barely spent 10 minutes unpacking before stepping back outside. The first thing that struck him was the intensity of life around him. Vendors on the corner sold snacks wrapped in banana leaves. Students in uniforms hurried by with backpacks bouncing against their sides. Stray cats lounged under parked motorcycles, barely lifting their heads as people walked past them. Everything felt alive, buzzing, and unpredictable. Mason wandered through the streets with a smile that wouldn't leave his face. The world felt bigger and more colorful than anything he had known. But on his first full day, something unsettled him. As he walked through a crowded market, he noticed a man wearing a faded cap standing near a fruit stand. The man's posture was relaxed, almost casual. Mason didn't think much of it, but later, when he sat on a bench outside a convenience store, he saw the same man leaning against a post across the street. His cap was pulled low, and he carried a worn plastic bag that swung gently with each step. Mason told himself it was nothing. Manila was a huge city. People crossed paths repeatedly all the time. The idea that the man might be following him felt dramatic, almost foolish. Still, he couldn't shake the thought. When he returned to his hotel that evening, he glanced behind him more than once. The man was nowhere to be seen, and Mason tried to laugh off his worry. The next morning, he planned to finally meet Liana. She had messaged him again, apologizing for not being able to meet the previous day. She said she felt terrible and promised she would make time soon. Mason accepted her excuse easily, telling himself she must be as nervous as he was. He spent the morning exploring a different part of the city, walking through wide streets lined with old buildings and modern malls. That afternoon, he sat in a small cafe drinking iced coffee when he saw the same man with a faded cap standing across the street. The man wasn't looking at him directly, but Mason felt the weight of his presence. His first instinct was to leave, but he forced himself to stay calm. He didn't want to ruin his trip with paranoia. He finished his drink, paid quickly, and walked away at a steady pace. This time, he checked every reflection he passed: windows, mirrors, even shiny car doors. Once, he caught a glimpse of the man several yards behind him. Not close enough to alarm people, but close enough to follow without losing him. That evening, Liana sent another message with another excuse. Mason felt a sharp sting of disappointment, but convinced himself she must have a good reason. He wasn't ready to accept that something strange was happening as he walked back to his hotel. The sun set behind the tall buildings, turning the sky orange and soft purple. Mason felt Manila shifting around him. The excitement was still there, but a new layer of unease had settled beneath it. He didn't want to admit it out loud, even to himself, but the city no longer felt like the dream world he had imagined. And the man with the faded cap was still out there, matching his steps from the shadows, never too close, never too far, but always present. Mason woke the next morning with a heaviness he could not explain. It was the kind of weight that settles in slowly, built from quiet worries pushed aside for too long. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the curtains glowing faintly from the morning sun outside. For the first time since arriving in Manila, he didn't feel immediate excitement. Instead, he felt the quiet echo of the man with the faded cap, as if the memory of being watched had followed him into his sleep. He checked his messages, hoping to see one from Liana telling him she was finally free to meet. Instead, he saw another excuse, shorter this time, less warm. Something felt off. The tone didn't sound like the person he had been talking to for months. He read the message again and again, trying to convince himself he was imagining things. In an attempt to clear his mind, Mason decided to spend the morning inside. He opened his laptop and searched through Liana's old posts, thinking he could distract himself by revisiting the images he once loved. But as he scrolled, something strange caught his attention. A photo he had seen many times before. Liana standing beside a street mural appeared again further down her feed, but this time it had a different date. He checked another picture and found the same problem. He leaned closer to the screen, feeling a slow chill crawl up his arms. The timestamps didn't match. Some photos had been posted multiple times, months apart, as if the account owner was recycling images to look active. He began clicking faster, moving through every post she had ever shared. Many of them looked suspiciously professional, with perfect angles and lighting. They didn't match the casual tone of her captions. Then he checked the comments. Most were generic and came from profiles with barely any activity: no profile pictures, no personal information, no real history. They all sounded strangely similar, like they were written by one person pretending to be many. Mason's heartbeat picked up. He opened one of the profiles and found almost nothing. Another had only a single friend. Another had a username made of random letters. Something cold formed in his chest. He clicked through Liana's friends list. Many of them were blank accounts or suspiciously recent. The realization hit him hard. The world he believed was real might have been staged, built from pieces that didn't belong to the same person. For the first time, he allowed himself to entertain a thought he had refused to consider: Liana might not exist. Not in the way he believed. As he sat frozen in front of his laptop, a soft rustling sound came from under his hotel door. He walked over cautiously and found a small folded piece of paper lying on the floor. His name was written on it in shaky handwriting. Mason's hands trembled as he opened it. The message was brief but terrifying. It warned him to leave Manila at once. It said he was in danger and mentioned Liana's name as something he needed to forget immediately. He looked toward the door and saw nothing but an empty hallway. No footsteps, no movement. Whoever slipped the note had vanished. His heart pounded as he studied the handwriting again, and Evan rushed, almost desperate. He didn't know who wrote it or how they knew his situation, but the urgency felt real. Suddenly the memories of the man with the faded cap came flooding back. The constant presence, the silent watching, the way he always stayed just far enough to avoid confrontation. Mason realized the man was not a coincidence. Someone had been tracking him from the moment he arrived, and the message slipping under his door proved that he was not imagining any of it. He tried to call Liana, but the number she had given him rang once and disconnected. He tried again. Same result. His stomach tightened. He felt the walls of his room closing in, as if the safety he believed he had was nothing but a thin illusion. He sat on the bed, gripping the note, realizing he had walked into something much bigger than a failed romance. Someone had created an entire identity to pull him into this city. He didn't know who or why, but the truth he had ignored for so long was now unavoidable. The person behind Liana's account wasn't a hopeful woman waiting to meet him. It was someone who wanted him exactly where he was, alone, far from home, and easier to trap. Mason spent the next few hours pacing around his small hotel room, replaying every moment of his trip in his mind, every excuse Liana gave, every mixed detail in her messages. Every time he saw the man with the faded cap, all of it formed a dark, tangled thread he could no longer ignore. He felt foolish for missing the signs, but fear pushed him past embarrassment. Something dangerous was happening, and he needed to act before it swallowed him completely. His first instinct was to leave Manila immediately. He opened his laptop and tried to change his flight. The airline's website loaded slowly, then froze. When he refreshed the page, he received an error message saying the system couldn't process his request. He tried again and again, switching browsers, re-entering his booking code, even attempting to call customer service. Every effort ended the same way: blocked, unreachable, or mysteriously interrupted. He took a break to calm down, then decided to withdraw cash and buy a new ticket from the airport in person. He hurried to the nearest ATM, inserted his card, and waited. The machine hesitated before flashing a message that the card had been locked. He tried another bank nearby with the same result. A surge of panic hit him as he checked his phone. Several notifications from his bank warned him of suspicious activity on his account. His access was temporarily restricted, leaving him stranded in a foreign city with barely enough cash for a few days. Mason stood frozen in the street as people walked past him, unaware of the silent crisis unfolding in his life. The air felt thicker than usual, pressing against his lungs. He knew none of this was coincidence. Someone had placed obstacles in every direction he tried to run. By nightfall, the situation felt almost unreal. He returned to his hotel with shaking hands, trying to act normal as he walked through the lobby. He forced himself to stay alert as he took the elevator up to his floor. Every sound felt threatening: the hum of the echo, the soft creak of the hallway floor, even the distant chatter of other guests inside his room. Mason locked the door and double-checked the latch. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the note still folded on the nightstand. The message had warned him to leave immediately, but how? His accounts were blocked, his flights inaccessible, and someone was watching him. He kept replaying the moment he saw the man with the faded cap outside the cafe, the way he lingered, the deliberate distance, the watchful eyes. Then the lights flickered, once, twice. The hallway outside went silent. Mason's heartbeat thundered in his ears as he crept toward the peephole and looked out. Two figures stood near his door. One of them lifted a device and held it near the electronic lock. A faint beep echoed in the otherwise quiet corridor. The other man stepped forward, and Mason recognized the shape of the worn cap even before he saw the face. He backed away from the door instantly, his breath shallow. He searched for something he could block the door with, but the room had nothing heavy enough to help. There was no time to think. He grabbed his backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and moved toward the emergency exit at the far end of the hallway. He opened it carefully and slipped into the stairwell just as the sound of the lock outside his room clicked unnaturally. Mason flew down the stairs, skipping steps, gripping the rail tightly. The stairwell smelled of dust and concrete, and every echo of his footsteps made him fear he was being chased. When he reached the lobby, he avoided the main entrance and slipped out through a side exit that opened into a dim alley. He emerged into the chaos of Manila's evening streets, blending into the crowd as quickly as he could. His relief lasted only seconds. When he looked ahead, he noticed a small fruit stall lit by a single bulb. Sitting beside it was a young woman whose face he recognized instantly, the same face from Liana's pictures. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't posing for a camera. She was simply sitting quietly, eating a piece of fruit, unaware of the storm Mason had stepped into. Seeing her in real life stunned him. She looked different from the idealized images, real tired, and completely disconnected from the persona he had fallen for online. In that moment, Mason understood that she had never been communicating with him. Whatever trap he had walked into had used her identity as bait, and she had no idea. Before he could approach her, a motorcycle engine roared behind him, echoing off the buildings. The nightmare he tried to escape was far from over, and someone was closing in fast. Mason froze as the motorcycle skidded to a stop beside him, its tires scraping against the pavement. The engine's roar cut sharply through the night air, startling people nearby. The rider swung one leg off the seat, and even before Mason saw his face, he recognized the familiar faded cap. The man moved with quick, confident steps, as if the crowded street offered no obstacle at all. Panic surged through Mason's chest. He glanced toward the young woman by the fruit stall, the real woman behind the photos he had fallen for. Her expression shifted from calm curiosity to sudden fear the moment she recognized the man approaching Mason. It became clear she knew him, not as a stranger passing by, but as someone connected to danger. She stood abruptly, knocking over a small basket of oranges, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Mason stepped back, his legs trembling. He considered running, but crowds filled the street in every direction. The man reached out and grabbed Mason's arm with surprising force. For a split second, Mason saw the intensity in his eyes, calculated, cold, and utterly unbothered by the dozens of people around them. Then, as if the world was holding its breath, a police patrol car rolled slowly around the corner. Its headlights washed over the street, bright and intrusive. The officer inside had clearly noticed the commotion of the fallen fruit, the tense posture of the man grabbing Mason, the panic written across the woman's face. The car came to a stop, and the officer stepped out, hand resting near his holster. The man in the faded cap hesitated. It was only a second, but it changed everything. His grip on Mason loosened, and his eyes flicked toward the alleyways behind him. The officer shouted something indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable, firm, commanding. The man shoved Mason back and bolted down a narrow side street. The officer ran after him immediately, leaving Mason standing breathless in the middle of the crowd. The motorcycle, left idling, vibrated on its kickstand. People gathered in small clusters, whispering about what happened. Mason's heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the noise around him. He looked at the young woman, the real woman, who was now staring at him with caution, sympathy, and a trace of guilt all mixed together. She approached slowly, as if afraid he might disappear or collapse. She introduced herself as Reyna Marquez. Her voice carried exhaustion, the kind that comes from being pulled into trouble she never asked for. She explained that her pictures had been stolen months ago by an online group known for targeting foreigners. They used images of unsuspecting women to create convincing identities, luring men from abroad with promises of romance and companionship. Reyna said she had gone to the police many times, but the group operated like smoke, constantly shifting locations, using different devices and new faces. She had been stalked by them herself, pressured to stay silent, and monitored so she couldn't warn anyone. When she recognized Mason from one of their recent posts, she tried to find him earlier but didn't know where he was staying. She had been searching for him in crowded places for 2 days. Hearing this, Mason felt his stomach twist. He had believed he was following love to Manila, but instead he had walked into a network skilled at deception and disappearance. The man with the faded cap wasn't acting alone. He was part of a system built to trap people exactly like Mason, hopeful and far from home. After a tense hour giving statements to the police, Mason learned that the officer had managed to corner the man in the cap in a dead-end alley. The man refused to speak, but his capture was enough for the authorities to reopen several old cases connected to the group. Reyna agreed to testify, though fear flickered in her eyes every time the group's name was mentioned. The police insisted on escorting Mason back to his hotel. Every step through the streets felt surreal, as if he were walking through someone else's nightmare. He couldn't believe how close he came to becoming another missing traveler's story, his belongings untouched in a hotel room, his fate a mystery. 2 days later, with the help of the police, he finally boarded a flight back to the United States. As the plane lifted into the sky, Mason stared out the window at the glowing city below, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering dread. Somewhere in Manila, there were still people searching for their next target. The unbelievable part wasn't that he had followed a dream across the world. It was that he survived a trap designed with precision, patience, and a deep understanding of how hope can make a person blind. He returned home changed, wiser, wary, and aware that not every dream is meant to be followed, especially the ones built by people hiding in the shadows.